Hello, Archie Dunlop here with Talking Astrology with Archie on Monday, May the 20th, 2024. Today the Sun moves into Gemini. Well, actually, it might move into Gemini very early tomorrow if you're in New Zealand, for example. But overall, we can say that the Sun is starting to move into Gemini. And in this video, I want to consider what it means to have the Sun in Gemini. And I do speak from some experience, being a Gemini myself. And I do want to consider a few people who have the Sun in Gemini. Of course, this is a completely biased sample. People that I find interesting, people I have very often covered in previous videos, but I want to see if we can find any common ground between the different Geminis. I know people say you shouldn't look at sun sign astrology, but I don't know, I find sun sign astrology interesting. I think it's a great challenge to take something as absolutely basic as the sun sign and to try to make connections there. It's something that certainly amuses me. But before I look at the Sun in Gemini, I want to consider what is happening today, which is Monday, May the 20th, 2024. So here is a chart for today, set for noon, New York. There are some people who have their suns in Gemini. There we have, top left, we got the Marquis de Sade, who I have talked about several times recently. There is rapper Kendrick Lamar. I don't really know anything about him, but he seems to be in the news, so I thought I'd mention him. Marilyn Monroe had the Sun in Gemini. Boris Johnson had the Sun in Gemini. And so did horror film actor Christopher Lee. And a couple of other horror film actors had their Sun in Gemini. And I'll be discussing a really very interesting connection between a particular genre of horror film and the sign Gemini. So yes, the Sun moves into Gemini today at just before 2 o'clock in the afternoon, London time. So that means that if you're in Western Europe, really the first part of the day, you're going to have the Sun in Taurus. And then early afternoon, Sun moves into Gemini. As you move further east, the Sun will go into Gemini later and later. And if you're in Australia, and parts of Australia, I always get confused with Australian time zones, but I know I think there are several. But certainly, I think parts of Australia, Eastern Australia, certainly New Zealand, the Sun won't go into Gemini until early tomorrow. The same applies, for example, if you live in Vladivostok, if you happen to be there in Kamchatka. So that's one thing going on today, and I think that is going to be an important change. You know, we've had this huge build-up in Taurus, and we had 5 planets in Taurus: Mercury, Uranus, Venus, Jupiter, and the Sun. But now the Sun is finally leaving Taurus, moving into Gemini. So that fixity of that Taurus build-up is starting to break up, and we may find that there is a certain amount of flexibility there, which perhaps wasn't there before. And maybe we can see things in a different light. We may have got very concerned about one single point of focus, and with the Sun in Gemini, it moves on. And at the same time, we've got a very different sign change coming up today. And that is the moon moving from Libra into Scorpio. So, we think things are getting more cerebral, less emphasis on perhaps emotions, with Sun moving from Taurus into Scorpio. Then we see that the Moon is moving into Scorpio. Now, that Moon moving into Scorpio, it takes place New York time at 6:34 p.m., which is 3:34 p.m. in Los Angeles and the west coast of the US West Coast. So that's late in the day if you're in the Americas, and really it's about tomorrow if you're anywhere else. So that Moon in Scorpio is really only an issue. Moon moving into Scorpio is really only an issue if you are in the Americas and if it is late in the day. So for many of us, we don't really have to worry about Moon moving into Scorpio until tomorrow. But a reminder that the Moon is in the Via Combusta. That is a part of the sky between 15 Libra and 15 Scorpio. Generally speaking, the Via Combusta is stronger in the Scorpio part of the Via Combusta, between 0 Scorpio and 15 Scorpio, compared to 15 Libra and 0 Scorpio. So we're moving into the Scorpio part of the Via Combusta. And, this is a time where things can just happen. We have plans, we expect things to work in a particular way, but with the Moon in the Via Combusta, it just doesn't happen as we expect. And so, we have to reconsider our plans, unless our plans are written in stone and we just have not got a plan B, in which case there could be trouble. Also, the Sun is quintile Saturn. So there's the Sun, 0 degrees Gemini. There's Saturn at 18 Pisces. So they're 72 degrees apart. So 72 degrees is 1/5 of the circle. So the Sun and Saturn are 72 degrees apart. And quintile can be connected with style. It's a very man-made aspect, being 1/5 of the circle. And it's about what we bring to bear, what we try to bring to bear. So we have thoughts, we have ideas, but can we actually bring these ideas out there into the world? And that's a real challenge. So when you've got Sun quintile Saturn, we are perhaps struggling to create the discipline and focus in order to turn our perhaps mental fantasies, particularly Sun in Gemini, mental fantasies into concrete reality. And in terms of our style, we might feel that it's best to try to be very restrained and very disciplined. We may feel that that is the best way of approaching the world, and that's how we want to be seen by other people. But Sun quintile Saturn, it's quite a gentle aspect. I don't think we need to really worry about it too much. And really, those are the main aspects today. There isn't much else going on aspect-wise. As far as midpoints are concerned, we have the Sun is on the Mars node midpoint. Now, that is another aspect that I perhaps should have mentioned. So if you've been listening to my videos for the last couple of days, you will know that I've been talking about Mars being conjunct the North Node. Now, that aspect is probably more exact yesterday than today, Sunday, but it's still pretty close. So that is an aspect that's very much there at the moment. And the Sun is semisquare the Mars North Node midpoint. So perhaps we should start off by considering what it means for Mars to be on the North Node as well. I've gone into detail about that in past videos, but it's basically about it being the right thing to make ourselves heard. Mars is an aggressive energy. It's in Aries. it knows that something has to be done. And when it's conjunct the North Node, something really does have to be done. So it's not a time to be just a bystander. We thought, well, I'm not involved. It's not my problem. Walking away. Okay, sometimes we have to walk away if it's a matter of personal safety, of course. But provided our safety is not being compromised or is at risk, it is a time where we need to intervene, where we need to assert ourselves and perhaps show that we care. And Mars conjunct North Node, maybe we're going to get upset about a cause, and perhaps we should be angry about a cause. Maybe that's okay. Maybe that's the right thing to do. And with the Sun semi-square Mars node midpoint, the pressure there, I think, is even stronger. There are things that we want to intervene in. And in terms of other people and all our network of friends and contacts, it's a time to be heard. It's a time to be assertive, though there is some danger that we're too assertive. So the question is, how much force is enough force, and how much force is too much force? Another midpoint to consider is Mercury on the Mars-Jupiter midpoint. So there's Mars, there's Jupiter, and Mercury is right in the middle of that. So Mercury is about I don't know, 21, 20, 22 degrees away from Mars, and it's 21, 22 degrees away from Jupiter. So Mercury is on the Mars-Jupiter midpoint. And so with Mercury on the Mars-Jupiter midpoint, many of us have got something to say that we need to say with great enthusiasm. And so, we shouldn't hold back. So it's a kind of similar message to Mars on Mars conjunct the North Node. And Venus is halfway between Uranus and Jupiter. So Venus is on a Jupiter-Uranus midpoint. In other words, we have this conjunction between Venus, involving Venus, Jupiter, and Uranus are all together. And so that can be about expressing our freedom. It can be finding interesting and exciting relationships that perhaps come out of nowhere. Or it could be about asserting our independence. Venus is a planet of relationships, and it's about other people, and it's on Jupiter-Uranus midpoint. And we think this is it. We've had enough. We want to be free, and if someone has been holding us back, we might feel a great sense of relief when we finally realize we got rid of them. I mean, that's one possibility about how Venus on the Jupiter-Uranus midpoint works. I just give you an idea. I would just look at the what Reinhold Ebertin in his combination of stellar influences says about Venus on the Jupiter-Uranus midpoint. I think he's pretty positive about it. So he says Venus on a Jupiter-Uranus midpoint. Oh, he's really optimistic. A happy feeling of love, artistic knowledge and perception, a changing love life, inconstancy in one's attachments. Oh, okay. A little bit of negativity coming in. The tendency to fall in love rashly, a sudden engagement. So that really fits it. A sudden engagement. Venus on conjunct Jupiter-Uranus. Could be any form of engagement. It just doesn't mean you have to get married with Venus on a Jupiter-Uranus midpoint. But it does indicate that relationships can be exciting. And also it relates to artistic ability and the kind of art that one can produce. And it can be quite different, and it can be quite unexpected. So there are a couple of midpoints of interest today. Turning to the heliocentric picture, let's switch the coordinate system to the heliocentric chart. And there we have it. So these are the heliocentric positions for today. Obviously, the Sun has gone into Gemini. That means that the Earth has gone into Sagittarius. So there's the Earth in Sagittarius. Now, the Sun, when the Sun moves into Gemini, it starts making a trine to Pluto. But the equivalent aspect from a heliocentric perspective is it's making a sextile to Pluto. So Earth is making a sextile to Pluto. And so with Earth sextile Pluto, this can be a time of great power when we can get things done and we can be influential, but in a way that is quite easy. It's just easy to come across as a powerful, influential person. So, we shouldn't hold back. If we have a chance to influence people, then now might be the time to do it. Okay, this Earth-Pluto sextile may also continue until Tuesday, so it's not. So if nothing happens today, don't feel you've missed your chance, because I think tomorrow we're still going to feel that this Earth-Pluto sextile. There's not a lot else that I can see. The Mars-Saturn conjunction, which I was going on about for so long recently, is starting to break up. So Mars is nearly 2 degrees away from that, from the conjunction to Saturn. So that is not quite the issue it used to be. So perhaps sort of feelings of fear and frustration are starting to dissipate. So I don't think there's a great deal to report on the heliocentric front, but I thought that I would just look at it just so we need to keep track of what's happening from a perspective of the Sun when we put the Sun at the center of the solar system. That's why we're looking at the Earth now, and the Moon disappears because from the Sun's perspective, the Earth and the Moon are in the same place. Okay, so I am now going to consider what is going on with the 12 signs. I will switch back to the normal geocentric positions. So these are my forecasts for today, for the 12 signs, for Monday, May the 20th, 2024. Aries. Mars continues to be conjunct the North Node. So it is a time, Aries, where you must be mobilized and ready. Doesn't mean you have to do anything, but you must always be prepared to act. I think the thing with action is that in many cases, action needs a little bit of contemplation. It's not immediately obvious what the right thing to do is. It can take some thought. I think that might be one of the reasons why more women were saved on the Titanic than on the Lusitania. I think the Titanic took 3 hours to sink. The Lusitania went down immediately. So all this sort of women and children first didn't really apply on a Lusitania because people didn't really have a chance to be moral and to think what is the right thing to do. Whereas in the Titanic, people had 3 hours to think, well, is it really worth it? Is my life so important? Maybe, yes, overall, I think it's time I can do the right thing. And I think that might be what's happening here. Okay, I'm not saying you're going to go down in a shipwreck, but the point is that morality takes time to develop. Taking the right moral decision is not immediate. And so be ready to take the right decision. Don't just think about it. But I don't think you will, because I think that you're an Aries. It's not like you're a Gemini, like me, who can spend ages thinking about what is the right thing to do. I think when you see it, you will know what needs to be done. And I think in most cases you can act in quite a fortuitous way. Though don't have high expectations of other people. And this may be another reason why it's important for you to take action, because if you don't do something, I mean, you might think that other people will do it. No, they won't. You might be the only person who notices something. And if you think that if you don't notice it, someone else will, I think you might be wrong there. Because I think at the moment, Aries, you're going to find that people are slow. Just not as slow as you. Sorry, just not as fast as you. They're going to be distracted. They're going to be disorganized. They're going to be wrapped up in their own problems and issues. I mean, I'm sure these problems and issues in many cases are pretty trivial, but anyway, they regard them as being important. And so they're not going to be able to take action. And I think that could disappoint you. And that's why, Aries, I think that today it's important not to have high expectations. Though, I should point out that the Sun is moving into Gemini. I think from an Aries perspective, that is good news, because Gemini and Aries are two signs that have a certain connection with each other. They get on quite well. I mean, they're both positive. Of course, Aries is positive because it's a fire sign. Gemini is a positive because it's an air sign. And, when the Sun was in Taurus, things might have just seemed a bit slow. And with the Sun moving into Gemini, you're getting ideas and you're in general finding that it's becoming easier to communicate, but maybe not today. It's not because you can't communicate, it's just some people are just not particularly receptive to whatever you're trying to say. But still, I suppose you have to make the effort, but it could be hard work. So that means, Aries, that today I think you need to try to be as independent as possible. And yeah, you need to be moral. You are independent, but you can also, it's not just about keeping yourself to yourself, it's about thinking independently and not being constrained by social mores and what you're supposed to be doing, because there just could be a situation where your action is required, because if you don't do it, I don't think anyone else will. But of course, don't take risks. I'm not inviting you to do anything that risks life and limb or anything like that. You have to evaluate the situation. But I think, as I was perhaps saying in the past, the risk, I think, that you might be taking if you go out on your own, if you do something that no one else is doing, the risk I think you'll be taking is just being embarrassed, and no one likes to be embarrassed, but sometimes you just have to take the plunge. Taurus. The Sun is leaving your sign today. There were 5 planets in Taurus. Now there are only 4. So this big emphasis in your sign is starting to end. And of course, the Taurian birthday season is over with the Sun moving into Gemini. And I'm hoping that you have made the most of your. Well, of course, when I say the Taurian birthday season, I'm assuming you're coming into that, and that has the assumption that as a Taurus you're reading this because your Sun is in Taurus, and I do appreciate that you might be reading this because your ascendant is in Taurus, and I can't really talk about the Taurian birthday season, or even your Moon is in Taurus. So if you're reading these horoscopes on the basis of your sun sign, then it would be true that your birthday season is over. Obviously, with ascendant or the moon, then no, we can't really talk about the birthday season for Taurus. But in general, that the build-up in Taurus is coming to an end, and that might be a little bit of a relief. You might be starting to feel that the spotlight is no longer on you, that you can perhaps focus on other things. And it might also be a time when you have to consider some of the things you've been thinking about and working on over the last month, and actually starting to think, how are you going to put them into practice? How are you going to make them real? And you may have to consider, for example, their financial dimension. It's all very well having ideas, having new plans, but can they be paid for? What really is the cost of a particular action that you really were very interested in, that you really wanted to get going on? And in that sense, the sun moving into Gemini is about the dawning of reality. And another thing happening today is that Venus, which is your ruler, Venus rules Taurus, is conjunct the Jupiter-Uranus midpoint. So what that means is, not so long ago, a day or two ago, Venus was conjunct Uranus. And in a couple of days' time, Venus will be conjunct Jupiter. So Venus is halfway between the exact conjunction of Uranus and the exact conjunction of Jupiter. So we can say that Venus is on the Jupiter-Uranus midpoint. And if you were watching the introduction to the planetary picture, you'd see that I looked at what Reinhold Ebertin said about Venus on a Jupiter-Uranus midpoint, and it's quite exciting. It's about meetings with new people. It can be about romantic excitement. Things happen. You meet people. Could work the other way though. So if you're involved in a relationship, you might think, this relationship is holding me back. Therefore, I need to do something about it. I need to break free from it. And Jupiter-Uranus as a pair is about freedom and being able to break free, and in the process feeling a great sense of relief. Ebertin also says about the Jupiter-Uranus combination that it is the thank the Lord combination. Great relief that we finally got out of something. We've rid ourselves of something. And so that can be a way in which Venus on the Jupiter-Uranus midpoint is working. And yes, it can be about art, it can be about creativity. It's about thinking beyond what you know and trust. And that can be a bit of a challenge for some Taurians. Taurus can be a very traditionally orientated sign, and it is fixed. Doesn't like too much change, but Venus on a Jupiter-Uranus midpoint should be perhaps encouraging you to create change and to consider things that are really completely divorced from your everyday experience. As far as the moon is concerned, the moon is now in very late Libra. And with the moon in very late Libra, you may feel that you are in the process of finishing something off. Something you've been working on perhaps for the last couple of days. It seems a bit of a mess. You're trying to organize it. It's hard work. Maybe other people are not being as cooperative as they should be, but it should be finishing off. And if you are an American Taurian, then late this afternoon and this evening, you start to experience the moon's sign change. The moon moves from Libra into Scorpio, and with the moon moving from Libra into Scorpio, then tonight there is going to be increased focus on other people and the kind of impact other people have. And if you're with people this evening, remember that I'm only talking about you if you're in the Americas. If you're not in the Americas, I'm talking about something that really is going to happen tomorrow. Okay, maybe very, very late this evening if you're in the UK, but pretty much tomorrow. But yeah, so if you are in the Americas and this evening you are spending time with other people, you may notice that things become more emotional than usual. There is a blast of emotion. I don't know whether that will be a good thing or a bad thing. The moon is in Scorpio. It's a kind of emotions that do have to be treated with a certain amount of caution. So that is something to look out for, but so that only applies if you're in the Americas. But overall, Taurus, the takeaways for today: Sun is leaving your sign. I think that does mean that there is less focus on you, and that could be a good thing. And also Venus is on the Jupiter-Uranus midpoint, and I think that could be quite exciting, and you should be on the lookout for just unexpected and exciting events, which I think should in most cases be entirely positive. Gemini. The Sun is entering Gemini. It depends a little bit on your time zone. If you're in New Zealand, then the Sun won't be entering Gemini until early on Tuesday. But I think overall we can see it as a day where the Sun is starting to edge into your sign. I remember the time that happens. If you're in the UK, that's just before 2 o'clock in the afternoon. If you're in New York, that would be just before 9 o'clock in the morning. If you're in California, just before 6 in the morning. If you're in Paris, just before 3 in the afternoon. If you're in India, that would be sort of 8 to, that would be around half past 8, mid-evening. And so it does depend to an extent where you are, but I think you can now pretty much say that the Sun is moving into your sign. And I think, that is good news. It's always good when the Sun enters Gemini. You will, I think, feel quite empowered. That finally the world out there is starting to understand you. The Sun in Gemini represents all that variety that's so important. The ability to see things in two different ways, and that's you. And so your flexibility and your ability to see things in 2 or even more different ways is reflected in wider society. So you may feel that you're kind of at one with yourself, and I think that you're going to be helped by the fact that you're going to have an enormous amount of enthusiasm today. I think you should have. You try it. I mean, you want things to happen, and Gemini, I think you're prepared to put a great deal of energy into making things happen, and I think that people should pick up on it. Though I suppose there's some danger that you take things too far, that you have a lot of energy, you've got aims, and you want it all to happen right now, and you could overdo it. That's why it's perhaps fortunate that the Sun is making a quintile to Saturn. So with this quintile to Saturn, that perhaps gives you an opportunity to bring things down to earth. Yes, Gemini, you've got some wonderful ideas. You've got a vision about the way the world should be, but in the first instance, it's just in your head. How can this possibly happen in the real world? Well, with Sun quintile Saturn, that gives you an opportunity to ground things and to make them real. So if you've got some plan or a vision with the Sun quintile Saturn, you can start to put it into action. And part of that process is going to be about self-discipline. And I think that you may want to show a very disciplined front to the world. You want to demonstrate to the world how very organized you are. Now, you may be completely disorganized, but that's not the point. You feel that by showing the world how organized you are, the world will take you seriously. And I think, in a sense, that is probably the right approach. Cancer. The moon is moving through a late Libra, and remember, the moon is a ruler of your sign. And with the moon moving through late Libra, you probably feel that there's not a great deal that can be done. It may just feel that you're applying to nothing. And you may not want to apply that to anything. It's just a feeling of, well, what is the point? And you're not really in the mood anyway. It's not great having that kind of approach, is it? But I suppose that's the way you feel. And maybe today perhaps you want to spend time at home, or you want to just be in an environment where everything is in balance, where there's no unpleasantness. That's the way you'd like it to be. Are you going to get your way? Should you be getting your way? Well, probably not. Mars is making a conjunction also. Moon is in late Libra, but Mars is making a conjunction to the North Node. And I've talked about this quite a lot when I've been talking to you. Mars conjunct the North Node is very dynamic. That conjunction is very, very close. And Mars conjunct North Node is, what you're supposed to be doing. And even if you don't feel like it, you need to be making some effort to have an impression. You have a view which I believe in some respects is superior to the way other people are working. You have, it's not just about good ideas, it's just an idea about how people should be organizing themselves, how people should be running their lives. You have an idea, and your idea is quite possibly the right idea. This would particularly apply if you're going into work today. It's beginning of the week, Monday. But in general, when you're in society, when you're with people, when you're making, when you have an opportunity to make an impact, you are someone who should be listened to. And I think it would be a shame if you were to stand back from this challenge. You would be, in a sense, turning your back on your own fate. And the problem is, if you do that, if you say, no, I don't want anything to do with it, I can't be bothered, I'm not really in a position to be making an impact on the world, don't want to be a leader, I don't want people to listen to me. If you do that, I suppose there is some danger that you attract angry events, you attract negativity, you attract things that come out of the blue. So if you want a simple life without any complication, you may actually have to assert yourself a little, because if you don't assert yourself, then things might unexpectedly go out of control, and you might then be forced to assert yourself. Now, the moon does leave Libra and go into Scorpio if you're in the Americas. So if you're in the Americas, late afternoon, early evening, moon moves from Libra into Scorpio. I think that is a good thing. I think it's a bit of a relief for you, because Scorpio is a water sign, you're a Cancer, Cancer is a water sign. It allows you to be more forward-thinking, more creative. I think you're going to be less focused on yourself with the moon moving into Scorpio. Now, that might sound strange, because Scorpio is a very self-orientated sign. At least it has a reputation for that, being really intense and just into one's own feelings. But I'm looking at this from a Cancerian perspective, and from a Cancerian perspective, Scorpio, at least compared to Libra, is a more creative sign in a way from a Cancerian perspective, and I think that you can benefit from the moon going into Scorpio this evening. So I don't know what you're planning on doing this evening if you're in the Americas, but if you have an opportunity to be creative or to do something fun, then maybe you should avail yourself of this opportunity. If you're not in the Americas, don't worry. The moon goes into Scorpio tomorrow, or in fact, I think if you're in the UK, I think it goes into Scorpio very late this evening. Is that right? Let me be clear about this. Be absolutely sure. So moon goes into Scorpio. When does the moon go into Scorpio? It goes. If you're in the UK, the moon goes into Scorpio at 11:34 this evening. So you'll have 11:34. So you will have 26 minutes of the moon being in Scorpio today if you're in the UK. But if you're in Europe, rest of Europe, or I don't know about Spain or Portugal, but other parts of Europe, Asia, Australia, New Zealand, then moon in Scorpio is really about tomorrow. Leo. The sun is your ruler, so if we want to understand what's happening to Leos, we do need to track the sun. That's how this kind of astrology works, and the sun is moving out of Taurus into Gemini, and this is going to have an impact on Leos. With the sun when sun was in Taurus, I think for many Leos, there was a big focus on achievement. You were perhaps concerned about what you were achieving, what you were not achieving, what you were supposed to be achieving, and there might have been pressure in that direction, and there's still pressure in that direction because Mercury, Uranus, Venus, and Jupiter, they're all in Taurus, but the sun is breaking away from that block, that Taurus block, and it's now moving into Gemini. And so with the sun moving into Gemini, and remember, this is obviously something that happens every year at this time of year, so it's a fairly regular event, even if it does happen 1 year apart, and of course 11 months of the year the sun is not in Gemini. But I think that you can be more open-minded with the sun in Gemini. The sun in Taurus is a fixed sign, very focused on things. Sun in Gemini, you start to see possibilities. You may have thought that there was only one way of doing something, and now with the sun moving into Gemini, it occurs to you that there are maybe 2 ways of doing things, or even 3 or 4 ways of doing things. And at the same time, you're thinking beyond just success, status, money. You're starting to ask yourself, well, what is the point? What's it all for? What is the broad picture? And I don't mean that in an existential sense. It's just perhaps wanting to align your endeavours to some broader point, to some broader purpose, and perhaps to be thinking about your hopes and your wishes, what you would like to happen. In a fairly spiritual sense, what would you like to happen? And with the sun in Gemini, that's what you're thinking about. And in the process, you may be considering how your ambitions can fit with other people's ambitions. And I think that you're going to be starting to think in a more collective way. And perhaps you might want to spend more time talking to friends or making new friends, and maybe being part of a group. And I suppose some Leos may become a little more politically minded with the sun moving into Gemini. I know that we're in a very politically charged environment in the world, and perhaps with the Sun in Gemini, you're going to start to pick up on that political charge. So if you have made an enormous effort to distance yourself from politics and what's happening out there, you might finally realize that actually it is important, and so you may become a more political animal over the next few days than you perhaps were, say, last week. But I think that's a good thing. It's not about what you believe in, it's the fact that you are believing in something, or no, not even believing in something, but you're actually engaging in global issues with the Sun moving into Gemini, and you're perhaps asking questions. And at the same time, I think that Leos are probably going to be fairly assertive, and I think that you're going to want to do things to get people's attention. I think you're going to really want to engage with people. Particularly today and tomorrow, it's going to be really important to engage with people. And I think that there is actually scope for getting angry, getting annoyed if people are doing something wrong or not doing something they're supposed to be doing. And at the same time, I suppose in a positive sense, you can actively create new contacts. So it's not a time to be alone. If you are alone or you don't feel you have enough contacts, I think it is a time when Leos need to make an effort to interact with more people. Yeah, the more people, the better. I think that right now is really important. Though, if possible, Leo, you should be trying to think beyond your immediate situation. I've already said this when I've sort of talked about what's going on in the world, but it's not just about things that are happening at a sort of societal and political level. It's also about the philosophical and spiritual thing, and with Mars conjunct the North Node, I think that some Leos are going to want to put a lot of effort into seeing a different world, and that might be about travel. I'm not going to talk about travel. I mean, it's an obvious thing. I mean, travel, it's supposed to be a good thing, isn't it? I mean, I don't know if that's always true. Travel is a good thing. I've gone on about travel in the past. I've had my travel rants. But it's interesting, by the way, that in Indian astrology, travel is connected with the 12th house, and the 12th house is somewhat unfortunate, and so it suggests that perhaps from a traditional Indian perspective, travel is not actually seen as a good thing. But I think that travel does need to be considered, or at least you could consider it. And so I think that some Leos are considering their travel plans, and you have to perhaps be thinking about what is the point of travel, and what are you trying to achieve, and can you achieve what you want without traveling? But traveling or not traveling, you do need to consider what's happening on the other side of the world. That is important, and it goes back to what I was talking about with this political awareness. Do not restrict your attention to your immediate environment. Don't tell yourself that it doesn't matter what's happening in the wider world, because it does matter. It matters in a moral sense. In the end, it matters in terms of your own self-interest, because things happening in the world are in the end going to affect you. We live in an interconnected economy, after all, don't we? So overall, Leo, I think you're in a powerful position. And I think Sun moving into Gemini is good news. And I think that you're in a position where you can have an impact, and more people can get to know who you are and what you can do. So, Leo, don't hold back. Virgo. You do actually have a lot of power at your disposal, Virgo. you might not feel that that is the case, but it is certainly true. And if you want something to happen, then you can really put the energy into actually making it happen. And I think you're helped by the fact that the sun is moving into Gemini. So, with the sun in Taurus, there was a certain theoretical element to the sun being in Taurus, thinking about what was possible, what was not possible, but maybe not entirely committing yourself. But now that the sun is in Gemini, you're thinking, now's the time. Got to do something. And remember that when the sun moves into Gemini, it actually starts making an aspect to Pluto. Now, that aspect to Pluto is not exact for a couple of days, but you may be starting to feel it. And, already when I looked at the heliocentric picture, the Earth is sextile Pluto. I'm not saying that the Earth sextile Pluto is necessarily going to have an immediate impact, an immediate and direct impact on your on your sign. It would be a star sign if you're looking at it from a perspective of your sun sign, but I understand you may be looking at this horoscope from a perspective of your ascendant or even your moon. But with the sun in Gemini starting to make an aspect to Pluto in Aquarius, I think you are in quite a powerful position, and at the same time you're going to be very good at expressing yourself. I think you'll make it very clear about what you want and what you don't want, and I think that you can bring an enormous amount of energy to bear. Now, you may have to be a bit careful there, because you might bring to bear too much energy. So when you're thinking about what you want and what you'd like to achieve, do ask yourself how you're going to do it and how much energy is actually required. You haven't got all the energy in the world. If you put too much energy into something, you will exhaust yourself. And also, if you put too much energy into something, you might cause damage. So work out how much energy is required. But still, there's no doubt that you can show an enormous amount of enthusiasm, almost an uncharacteristic amount of enthusiasm. This is a new Virgo. This is a Virgo who is very with it, who is not going to be overburdened with doubts and questions. I mean, that can be an issue with Virgos sometimes. Virgos like to get the details right, and they can ask so many questions that things just don't get done. And I don't think that's going to be a problem for today. I think, Virgo, you will have a clear sense of what what needs to be done, and the vision is going to be important, and not so much a vision, but certainly the ambition. There is a single ambition that will be guiding you as the sun moves into Gemini, and once you get a focus of that single ambition, then everything else should start to fall into place, and I think you'll have a good idea about what is required. Though it may be today, there could be a few financial issues that need to be sorted out. I don't think we're talking about anything major. It's just that, you have ideas, you have things you want to do, but there are things that have been building up financially which you perhaps put to one side, and maybe if you look at them again, you're thinking, hold on, this has to be sorted out. Maybe you need to talk to someone. Maybe you need to ask someone for money that they owe you. Just some little detail that's annoying you from a financial perspective. And if you can sort it out and you can sort of put it to bed, and then you can move on. And really, Virgo, that's the picture for today. There are not a great many aspects today. It's a day that's quite light on planetary aspects, and I think it's just enough to have a broad sense that the sun has gone into Gemini, that you now have a set of goals that you want to pursue, and you can ask some questions, but don't ask too many questions, because the key thing is to be able to move towards these goals. Libra, you, I think, benefit from the sun moving into Gemini. The sun in Taurus, from a Libran perspective, has been a bit annoying. It's perhaps encouraged you to be a little too introspective, to be focusing on kind of deep stuff that you don't really want to bother with. Okay, it's still there to an extent, because Venus is still in Taurus, but the sun is now moving out of Taurus. And remember, Libra, that you are an air sign. And so the sun is moving into an air sign. And so with the sun moving into an air sign, it feels right. It feels that you can think, and it feels you can express yourself, and you're able to be more flexible than you have been in the past. And I think that you can start to experience new things. Yeah, you need some new things, definitely. I think in the past you've been concentrating on quite a narrow range, and in a way that might have been a little too self-obsessive, and that concentration can come to an end, and you can start thinking about things from a broader perspective, and new experiences you can definitely benefit from. And also, the moon is moving towards the end of Libra. So the moon is in Libra today, but it's starting to move into Scorpio. In fact, this evening in the Americas, or even late afternoon in California, it starts to move. It's in Scorpio. So the moon moving to the end of Scorpio, end of Libra, it may be that something needs to be attended to, that it was working well, and it's almost an opportunity there, which you're in a position to take advantage of it, and that window of opportunity may be starting to close. So Libra, you should perhaps pay some attention to that. Some things don't last forever, and so it's a small opportunity, but it's something that's worth bothering with, I think. And so don't be complacent, don't be lazy. If there is a chance that is open to you, that's perhaps been open for the last couple of days, then perhaps you need to take action now, because if you wait any longer, you might miss your chance. Now, I've talked about the sun moving into Gemini, but I do need to talk about Venus. Venus is your ruler. And Venus is on the Jupiter-Uranus midpoint. Venus is conjunct Jupiter. Venus is conjunct Uranus. Venus is on the halfway between Jupiter and Uranus. And some Librans may feel a great sense of excitement. There may really be an opportunity to make things happen. There could be a sudden meeting, a sudden event, or it could actually be a sudden realization. Something may make sense. It's been building up for a long time, and suddenly it makes sense, and you actually realize that what used to be a burden is now just nothing, that you are free in a way that you haven't been in the past. And I think that is certainly something to be welcomed. So it's like you've gone into the depths and into territory that isn't really typically Libra, and you've gone into the depths, but in the depths you've found something and you realize things, and that does give you a great deal of freedom, and that's something very much to be welcomed. And you might also, from a more material perspective, from a financial perspective, Libra, it's really worth looking at the details. And I know you've got lots of things to do today, but having a good hard look at your finances, or finances may not just be your finances, other people's finances that are a little bit complicated. But if you look at the situation, you may actually realize that there is an opportunity to get some extra money that you didn't realize existed. So, Libra, really do be open to that possibility. Now, one final point I want to make, Libra, which kind of may sound a little bit negative, is that Venus is starting to move towards the fixed star Caput Algol. Now, it's not quite there yet, but I just wanted to check. I should have checked this beforehand, how far Venus is from Algol. It's pretty much there. So today and tomorrow, it's 26 arc minutes from Caput Algol. So today, tomorrow, Venus is on Algol. So I talk about Algol every now and then. It is a difficult star. Remember, Algol is the head of the demon. It's when Perseus decapitated the Gorgon. She held up the Gorgon's head, and in a day-to-day sense, I would have said that this Venus in Taurus, Venus conjunct Algol, may not be. It's not about decapitation. I think you have to be careful a bit with Venus conjunct Algol, that you probably don't want to be doing anything too dangerous today and tomorrow with Venus conjunct Algol. I think some caution is required, and you certainly, for example, you don't want to, for example, be driven at 80 miles an hour through tunnels in Paris. Princess Diana, she had Venus conjunct Algol, and of course she wasn't a Libra, she was a Cancerian. But it can be a bit difficult. So watch your neck. Don't strain your neck with Venus conjunct Algol. Don't do anything dangerous. And one thing about Venus conjunct Algol is it can be associated with jealousy. And at least in my experience, I've associated Venus conjunct Algol, and just Algol in general, with jealousy. And you may actually find that there are people who are jealous of you. That may not have occurred to you. But a lot of the negativity, any negativity you experience today, may be about jealousy. And even if it's not about you, you may experience jealousy today and tomorrow and see its results. As I said, it may not be about you. It may be about other people being the victims of jealousy, having to suffer because of jealousy, because jealousy can really be very destructive. When people are jealous, they can do unpleasant things. And so today and tomorrow, just be aware about issues of jealousy. And of course, it's very important that you are not jealous yourself. I mean, we can all be jealous. Jealousy is not some emotion that is out there, but people, all of us are jealous. I get jealous. Everyone gets jealous. But we have to be aware of it. And we have to be aware of how destructive jealousy can be. Scorpio, you need to pause a bit, I think. I understand, Scorpio, that there are things you want to do. You may even be in a little bit of a hurry to make them happen. But now might not be quite the right time. You're almost ready, but you need to get your timing right. And I'm not convinced that right now the timing is right. Now, sure, I understand that if you're in the Americas, the moon does move into Scorpio late this afternoon or this evening. So for American Scorpios, late in the day, you may have the possibility of starting to take action, which in the recent past, you haven't been able to do. But that's late in the day. And I think looking at the day in general, with the moon in late Libra, I think that, we might want to pause. And we have to be aware of other people, and that other people may be pretty useless today. They may not be able to deliver in the way they promise. They might backtrack, and they might just not be available. So in terms of other people, it's just very important not to have expectations. And I'm talking about other people in general, sort of the broad concept of other people and how you need other people, you try to work with other people. They're just going to be somewhat disappointing, I think, in most cases. Now, that doesn't mean to say disappointing in all cases. I think that there are going to be some honourable exceptions. After all, Venus is conjunct Jupiter, conjunct Uranus. It's on the Jupiter-Uranus midpoint. Venus rules Taurus, which is your opposite. Taurus is your opposite sign. So Venus on a Jupiter-Uranus midpoint. Someone, I think, could be a bit of a star. But, I'm probably talking about one person. I think maybe that one person is going to compensate for everyone else. But you, of course, have to make sure that you give that one person a chance, because I think, you may be in a situation where 9 out of 10 people are completely useless, but there's one person who, yes, could be a real star. But you then have to make sure that you're in the right place, that you're able to cultivate this person. And from a one-to-one, in terms of one-to-one relationships, one reason why you might feel that one-to-one relationships aren't satisfactory, it may actually be something to do with you. Because I think that if you are close to someone, that person is deep down going to be looking for excitement and variety and opportunity. And the question is, do they think you can provide it? And if they don't think you can provide it, then their reaction may actually be quite negative, and you may take the view that they are letting you down, when in fact it's you letting them down. So that means, Scorpio, you have got to be very self-aware today in terms of relationships. And you do have to consider the feedback loop. So there's you and there's someone else, and there's a constant feedback loop. And so consider your contribution to that feedback loop. And if you start to realize that you're having a negative contribution, then maybe you can change it. After all, Mars, which is your ruler, is conjunct the North Node. It was exactly conjunct, I think, yesterday, but Mars conjunct the North Node, it is a call to action. And, if you think that things are boring, that things aren't exciting, and you want to blame other people, it maybe your lack of action, maybe you drifted not into your north node, but into your south node, the south node in Libra. South node in Libra is just doing nothing, drifting, not applying to anything. And maybe you've been pulled in the wrong direction, and you need to perhaps bring that back to Mars conjunct North Node. So if things aren't right, rather than blaming other people, then make things right. Create something. A bit of organization, but energetic organization can make all the difference. So Scorpio, try to be as self-aware as possible, and do consider how your actions and thoughts are going to be impacting other people. And if someone is disappointing you, do consider how it might be at some level your responsibility. And if it's your responsibility, then perhaps you can make a few changes. Sagittarius. The sun is moving into Gemini. And from a Sagittarian view, that does mean that there may be an emphasis on relationships. I mean, after all, Gemini is the opposite sign to Sagittarius. So, when Sun moves into Gemini, it can be a time when Sagittarians very much have to think of the other. What is the other person doing? What impact does the other person have? And you then have to consider: are you actually ready for that? How are you going to deal with other people? And I think that at the moment, although other people are important, are becoming important, you're not particularly in the mood for engagement. The moon is in late Libra. It's void, of course. In other words, it's made its last major aspect to a major traditional planet before leaving the sign. And so you're thinking, things aren't going anywhere. You've done your bit, and you might as well just accept the way things are. And then the moon moves into Scorpio. Well, the moon moves into Scorpio this evening if you're in the Americas. It moves into Scorpio tomorrow, or late afternoon if you're in California. But moon moving into Scorpio, in some respects, that's just more of the same. Moon moving into Scorpio is just a time when you're not going to really be in the mood for engagement, even though things have changed, even though the sun is moving into Gemini. The sun in Gemini does mean that there are events happening in the world out there. There are people that increasingly want your attention, but this is a longer term thing. The sun is in Gemini until the summer solstice, if you're in the northern hemisphere. And when obviously at summer solstice, sun moves into Cancer. But you have quite a few weeks, indeed a whole month, to work out that sun in Gemini. And for the moment, as the sun starts to edge into Gemini, yes, you start to realize that other people are perhaps more important, that they are going to have an impact on you, but you're not really ready to deal with the full consequences of it. And if you do want to do anything, some Sagittarians might be interested in doing things that are a bit weird. You want to put your energy into strange things today, in many cases. And so I would review your plans for today, because some of your plans may not be fully advisable. You may think that something is harmless, that you're getting into an area that is it might be interesting, but it's not going to cause you any harm. But I would think again. I would exercise a certain amount of caution. You do not have to do stuff which is edgy, risky, or dangerous in order to show off your talents. You can just be yourself. You have it all yourself. And just by focusing on what you can do without taking any risks, and just accept it's all there for you. You don't have to go anywhere special or dangerous in order to find excitement. Excitement is with you, and it doesn't really need any outside input. At least for the moment, it doesn't. And so, what is the best thing for Sagittarians to be doing today? Well, probably the best thing for Sagittarians to be doing today is to just keeping their distance from the outside world, making sure that they are available. Remember, Sun is moving into Gemini. That does suggest that there is something going on in terms of other people. There are people that need your attention, but maybe you don't need to worry about it today. And just focus on something you're good at and just do a good job of it, and that will be enough. Capricorn, you want everyone to be happy. I think that is very true. That's very important to you at the moment, and I think that is in some ways good. You absolutely understand the importance of harmony and of people interacting well with each other. But is that dream a possibility? Just because you want harmony doesn't mean you're going to get harmony. And if you want harmony, you may have to be a little bit proactive about it, because if you leave people to their own devices, things could go wrong. They could have arguments, and they might have disagreements. It's all a bit stupid, but it can happen. It can happen if you're working, if you're in a working environment. It can happen at home. Family members can fall out with each other if you don't watch it. And so today, Capricorn, I just do think that you need to pay attention to what's going on. Yes, you can find harmony, you can bring people together and they can get on very well with each other, but I think a certain amount of supervision might be required. And maybe that particularly applies to your family. If you have a lot of people at home, then you need to watch how they're interacting with each other. And I think, you can bring people together, but I think if you are bringing people together, it very much has to be on your terms. And I think that good organization is going to be required, especially today when the Sun is moving into Gemini. So, Gemini is a sign that from a Capricorn view is about good organization. And with the Sun in Gemini, you can look at the way things are organized from a different perspective. You may start to realize that the way you had wanted to organize things is not necessarily the right way, and that you need to take a different approach, an approach that is perhaps more flexible. And a bit of reorganization might actually be a good idea, and I think that might be very much appreciated. Now, astrologically, there is not a great deal going on, but there is one aspect that I should point out, and that is the fact that the Sun is making a quintile to Saturn. So quintile traditionally is a minor aspect, 72 degrees, 1/5 of the circle. And with that Sun quintile Saturn, I think that you clearly have a vision about the way you like things to be. And it seems that you actually have the opportunity to make it happen. So it starts with an idea, a vision of perhaps the way things should be organized, perhaps the way you like people to be. And with that Sun quintile Saturn, there's an opportunity there to actually make that vision happen. So perhaps you need some willpower there, and you need to actually have some focus. And I know focus could be a little bit difficult with Sun moving into Gemini, because Gemini likes to sort of be in two places at once and likes to change its mind all the time. But with that quintile, if you can just have focus and discipline, and so you can get a clear link between your thoughts, your ideas, and the outside world, and just get a clear linkage there, and just make it happen and impose your vision on the outside world. And you might be surprised. You might find that you can actually make things happen. Aquarius. The Sun is moving into Gemini. Gemini is an earth sign. Let me start again. Sun is moving into Aquarius, and what's wrong? Sun is moving into Gemini, and Gemini is an air sign. Got it? So that is good news, because you're an Aquarius, you're an air sign, and it's great when there are other planets in air signs. It helps you to move, it helps you to think, it helps you to function. And when the Sun moves into Gemini, it actually starts making an aspect to Pluto. And of course, you've got Pluto at the beginning of Aquarius. And with that Sun moving into Gemini, I think you're starting to realize what you can do. And you've had this realization perhaps for some time. I mean, Pluto went into Aquarius, I think in January. Was it January the 19th off the top of my head? And Pluto went into Aquarius, and you did have a feeling that this was a new beginning for you, that you perhaps had to sort of embrace the future. But you perhaps hadn't actually realized how you could do it. You may be thinking, okay, the future is here, now what? Where do you fit into the future? And with the Sun moving into Gemini, starting to make a trine aspect to Pluto, I think that many Aquarians are going to get a sense of their own power. And I think the sense of your own power is going to get stronger over the next few days and weeks as other planets move into Gemini. Remember, the end of a week, Jupiter moves into Gemini, and Venus will move into Gemini. So things are happening, and this is where you get a real sense of what you can do, what you can achieve. And a lot of it hinges on your own fundamental creativity, being able to do something which is relevant. But also it's about your understanding of the way society is moving, because Pluto is in Aquarius, and that just means that in many ways, Aquarius, you are the future, and that's the way you like it, because Aquarius is a very future-orientated sign. And then you have to consider, how are you going to apply everything to the world out there? Well, short term, the moon is about to move into Scorpio. Now, moon moves into Scorpio late afternoon this evening if you're in the Americas. Moon moving into Scorpio for you is going to give you a strong sense of what you are supposed to be doing. And you may feel that in the past, the last couple of days, you've been sort of drifting around. You've been having different ideas. But now, with the moon moving into Scorpio this evening, if you're in the Americas, then things might start to crystallize, and you might start to have a clear idea about what you're supposed to be doing. And remember, the moon, as it goes into Scorpio, will make a square aspect to Pluto. So there could be a sense in which you feel you have to make things happen. Now, if you're not in the Americas, moon goes into Scorpio tomorrow, or very, very late in the evening if you're in the UK. So that's something you'll start to pick up on tomorrow as the moon moves into Scorpio. So that, as you know, by tomorrow everyone will experience the moon in Scorpio, and I will be talking about that again tomorrow when I do your forecast for Tuesday. And while this is going on, the Sun is quintile Saturn, and I think that quintile aspect, 72 degrees, 1/5 of the circle, could be important for Aquarians, because the Sun rules Leo, which is your opposite sign. Saturn rules Aquarius, and so Sun quintile Saturn is talking about the structure of a relationship and how relationships can form and how relationships can be created. And the quintile is about the number 5, obviously. It's 1/5 of the circle. And so with the Sun quintile Saturn, it may be a situation where you and someone else can be brought together. You and someone else who don't necessarily have a lot in common, but maybe you have to come together for a common purpose, for a fixed purpose. And maybe you have to make a special effort to get close to someone who you don't entirely feel that they're on your wavelength, but you kind of know that you need to get close to this person, but it's important. And so from a relationship point of view, you may need to make a lot of effort to form one particular relationship, or it may be to strengthen one particular relationship. So it might be a relationship you're in, maybe it's not working particularly well, or it's quite loose, but maybe it needs to be strengthened for a purpose. Or maybe you just have this vision about this way the relationship should be. And I think with the strength of your character, you can actually make it happen. Pisces. The Sun is moving into Gemini, and from the Piscean view, the Sun in Gemini can be a little bit on the introspective side, again from the Pisces perspective. And with the Sun in Gemini, you may feel that you do need to sort of withdraw a bit. You don't need to be out there all the time. There is room to sort of be yourself, and that might be the best thing, because Pisces, there are temptations today. You could be tempted to do things that are not always very sensible and could cause you a certain amount of damage. And so perhaps if you spend your time at home or in somewhere safe and secure, you may be keeping yourself out of trouble. So that is certainly one way of looking at things. Though Mars is making a conjunction to the North Node. I mean, I'm continuing on a theme of the weekend, because over the weekend Mars was conjunct the North Node, and it's in Aries. And as you probably know, Aries is related to finance from your perspective, from personal finance, not complicated finance. And you do need to try to keep things simple. I mean, you should have been doing this over the weekend, but today it's kind of more of the same. There are things to work out. You need to make sure that everything is in order financially. And if something is not in order, it may be because someone else has not been doing the right thing. Maybe someone's been overspending. Someone has not been telling you the truth about money. That's possible, but I don't want to exaggerate that. But all that is possible. You need to just ask direct questions. So in terms of money, the right thing to do is to be direct. If something is confusing you financially, particularly if another person is involved, you've got to make your feelings clear. Just make it simple. Let's make it simple. Let's understand what's going on. And I do think that your direct approach in terms of money will get results. And as far as relationships are concerned, relationships may not feel like your number one priority, but there are certain people who do have a lot of energy at their disposal, a lot of energy. And you perhaps have to decide how to deal with them. I mean, you perhaps need to be energized. And there are people out there who can make your life a lot more exciting. But you have to decide, is it worth the effort? I mean, I think that many Pisceans feel that it's not worth the effort. You feel that it is time to just relax. You've had enough. You don't need any distractions. Though I think a few Pisceans may still feel a little bit bored, and if you want excitement, I think that there will be people out there who are ready and able to provide this kind of excitement. But you have to ask yourself, is it worth the effort? Is it worth getting involved in something? Because some people, when I say people have got energy, some people have got a lot of energy. And once they get going, there'll be no stopping them. And this may relate to someone you're already in a relationship with. Partners have big ideas. They're quite happy to talk about their big ideas. And if you want to talk to them about their big ideas, they won't be able to stop. And in the end, they might want action. And yeah, but it might be exhausting. And I'm talking about any kind of relationship, not just romantic relationships. It could be business partnerships, it could be friendships, whatever. So if today you want to bring people into your life, you have to understand what you're letting yourself in for, and whether it's really worth the effort. Okay, that's the astrology. And now I want to look at today from the viewpoint of the I Ching. So I asked the question, what is Monday going to be like for those watching the I Ching section of this video? And the first hexagram I got was hexagram 44, which is coming to meet. Now, coming to meet is about people who are asserting themselves. It's about people who are very keen to get to know us, who are very keen to move into our sphere of influence, but perhaps too keen. And I think that there is a danger here that other people crowd us out. They might actually interfere with our fundamental independence. So the question is, how much do you value your independence? I mean, I think you should value your independence. And it's actually so easy to lose that independence. And, when we look at the lines of this hexagram, we see that the bottom line moves. And what this bottom line moving suggests is that we might find that there is someone who is up to no good, or just isn't really worthy of our attention, who somehow manages to infiltrate their way in. And so we find ourselves having to deal with someone who we don't really want to deal with. We perhaps we gave them a chance. We weren't paying attention. So consider who that person is. It's just some outside force that's trying to make itself part of our life, and we need to resist that, because our own independence today is really important, and we basically need to be as independent as we possibly can, because there are forces out there which are trying to make us dependent. And yes, they do need to be resisted, at least in the first instance. Now, there is a fifth line which moves, and with that fifth line moving, it is possible that someone who is a problem can actually be turned, or we can actually turn a problem person into a person who can be more advantageous. And so we may be talking about individuals who, they've got very much two sides to them. At first they create difficulties, but if we can channel them, then we can finally work out a way around it. And finally, the top line moves, and I think the top line coming to meet, we realize that we really don't want to be bothered with all of this. And I think it is about really taking a step back, being able to move beyond everything, and being able to maintain our independence. And it might also mean that we have to accept a conflict, that there could be a conflict perhaps with our superiors. If we have superiors, I suppose that would be maybe in a working environment, or people, I suppose it could be in the family, or someone who's normally used to bossing us around. But there could be a conflict there, and a conflict which I suspect we will win, because the idea is that we're able to withdraw, and it's just important that we have control today. And this hexagram 44 coming to meet, it does move, because we have got 3 moving lines, and it moves to hexagram 34, which is the power of the great. And I think that power of the great is actually our power. And it's about having our own inner power. It's it's the analogy there is perhaps of some wild animal, that we, having fought for our independence, fought to be a free spirit, we now are able to tune into our power, and it could be quite a raw power, and we might possibly take things too far, and we shouldn't be in too much of a hurry. We should accept that we have got a lot of power, but we have to channel that power, and we have to use that power at the right time, and perhaps that right time has not yet arrived. And so it's a time to enjoy the concept of our power, but not perhaps the reality of our power. Maybe we need to wait a bit, and wait until we've worked it all out, and wait until we've perhaps harnessed our power before we really use it. But fundamentally, we have the power, and I think that should be very reassuring. I'm now going to consider the sign Gemini, and I'm a Gemini, so I believe I have some ability to talk about the sign Gemini, and what Gemini actually means. So straight away, we have this issue: are we talking about the sun in Gemini, or are we talking about the ascendant in Gemini, or the moon in Gemini? Am I talking about Gemini in a general perspective? Well, to be honest, I'm talking about the sun in Gemini, and what it means to have one's sun in Gemini. And Gemini is an air sign, and Gemini is mutable. So one image with sun in Gemini is about lots of ideas, doesn't like to stay in one place, keep moving, therefore gets bored quickly. And we have different words that are keywords that are used with Gemini. I mean, that's a standard way we learn astrology. We learn the keywords. I mean, keywords associated with Gemini can be flexible, trivial, I'll come on to triviality and Gemini in a moment. But intellectual, so there's a bit of a contrast there, isn't there? Intellectual and trivial. And insincere. Gemini is often seen as being economical with the truth, because there's a certain flexibility there. I mean, the truth is solid and it's fixed. It's only in one place. And so Gemini can be associated with not telling the truth, although there are other signs that are associated with not telling the truth. And maybe there are different levels of Gemini. Gemini at its highest level and Gemini at its lowest level. I mean, what would Gemini be at its lowest level? I suppose Gemini at its lowest level would be the gossip, the insincere gossip, who just talks about trivia and can move from one subject to another and just with no sincerity whatsoever. It's just words, it just comes out, and can be actually concerned with trifles, just things that are just irrelevant. That can be a Gemini thing, just being concerned with just irrelevant details. At the highest level, I suppose we can think about Gemini as high intellect, someone who really likes to get to the bottom of things. There could be something almost philosophical about Gemini, but one has to ask, is Gemini really a philosophical sign? I'm not convinced that Gemini, in most cases, is a philosophical sign, although, as I'll be describing later, one of the 20th century's most important philosophers is a Gemini. But there is, philosophy requires some deep thought, and Gemini likes to keep moving, and there is a problem there with Gemini. Gemini is a bit uncomfortable with broad concepts, because the broad concepts can be restricting. Geminis do like to keep moving, and Geminis can actually be quite changeable in terms of their beliefs. Beliefs for a Gemini are very often just negotiable. It depends on the situation, and you can change your beliefs very, very quickly. So let's now just look at a few Geminis, and I hope that I can sort of in some ways, by looking at a few Geminis, can just get an overall view of what the sign Gemini is. And don't forget, I'm talking about people who've got their sun in Gemini. I'm not talking about people who've got their ascendant or their moon in Gemini. So a famous Gemini, well, Marilyn Monroe was a Gemini. And she was, I think, very aware that she was a Gemini. In one of the biographies of Marilyn Monroe, I think she was asked what it was like to be a Gemini, and apparently she said it was like being Jekyll and Hyde. I get that Jekyll and Hyde concept of Gemini is a very standard idea of being a Gemini, being two completely different people, and that's how Marilyn Monroe described being a Gemini. And when you're dealing with a woman with sun in Gemini, you do have to consider the possibility that sun in Gemini is projected. So the sun in Gemini may say something about the men in her life, the men she was attracted to. And you could say, well, who she really is her moon in Aquarius. And she had moon in Aquarius. Yes, she had moon in Aquarius, like Princess Diana. Princess Diana had moon in Aquarius. And so that moon in Aquarius is quite a similar sign to sun in Gemini. So when we see Marilyn Monroe, it's a bit confusing. Are we seeing Gemini or are we seeing Aquarius? I mean, she was, in her own way, quite unique and trend-setting. She liked to jog before jogging became popular, and she was, very original, and so you could say that is Moon in Aquarius. With the Sun in Gemini, in terms of projection, I mean, obviously a Gemini who is strongly associated with Marilyn Monroe is, of course, John F. Kennedy. And of course, she sang his happy birthday song, didn't she? And I always get confused about what her relationship was with John F. Kennedy, but you can imagine, you can see how she might get attracted to an intelligent man like John F. Kennedy and have an affair with him. And one of her husbands was what's his name? Arthur Miller, the playwright. So one of her husbands was an intellectual writer, and you could say, well, there's her Sun in Gemini, and that is how she projected it. And she also had Mercury in Gemini, so that is what she was looking for. And I think with her Sun in Gemini, I think there was a quest there, and I think she always understood that the intellect was important. She valued the intellect. Okay, she might not have been a great intellectual herself, perhaps because she didn't have the opportunity. That's not where she put her energies. But even then, it's something that she certainly valued, and I think that may be how the sun in Gemini actually worked. So, I mean, I don't want to spend too long on Marilyn Monroe's chart, but I think that we see elements of the Sun in Gemini. I mean, someone who was very communicative, very original, and was certainly attracted to the Gemini principle. Another person with Sun in Gemini is Kanye West. So Kanye West was born on June 8th, 1977. Now, Kanye West is not someone I know much about, but he is someone that does have a lot to say. And in terms of his political ideas, for example, he would say, didn't he say once that how he supported Trump? That's a very Gemini thing to do, someone who wants to cause a stir by saying things. And I mean, he does seem to like to cause a stir by saying things and doing things and trying to keep relevant that way. But, Sun in Gemini can get a bit crazy. He's got Sun conjunct Jupiter in Gemini, and it's opposition Neptune. So Neptune opposition Sun and Jupiter, it does put him under a lot of pressure, I think. And, Sun in Gemini, as a sign, it can split off. There is something actually quite schizoid about Gemini. I'm not necessarily talking about Kanye West here, but by schizoid, I mean one can separate the mind from the rest of the world, and one can just ignore outside reality, and that includes morality. Geminis can actually quite enjoy saying something which is totally immoral, because Gemini just takes a view, well, it's just words, but they can be divorced from material and moral reality. And continuing on the musical theme, someone I talked about recently was Kendrick Lamar was a Gemini. So he's just had this big battle with, Drake, and I did look at his chart a week or two ago. And so here's Sun in Gemini. So if you're a rapper and you have to keep talking, I mean, isn't that what it is with rapping? You've got to constantly talk, and you've got to, I don't know, is rapping talk, but the words have got to flow, and there's got to be a natural flow of the words and the rhyming. And that, you could say, is Gemini. With the case of the Kendrick Lamar Drake battle, Drake was a Scorpio, so if you're a Scorpio, the words are going to come more from the heart. If you've got the sun in Gemini, maybe that's different. But Gemini is perhaps the words have to be more consciously created. And so here's his sun in Gemini, opposition Uranus. So as a successful rapper, you can certainly see how sun in Gemini might be working. Words are so important to Geminis, and as I said, that idea that sticks and stones can break my bones, but words will never hurt me, which Geminis really like to think about. But of course, words can have an impact, and the written word can have an impact. And a person I've looked at quite recently was the Marquis de Sade. So the Marquis de Sade was a Gemini. I'm not going to put up his chart, but the Marquis de Sade, he has the sun in Gemini, and so with the sun in Gemini, his Gemini just gets interested in stuff. And so, of course, with Marquis de Sade, remember the Marquis de Sade, the word sadism comes from his name. And so the Marquis de Sade, as a Gemini, he had fantasies. Geminis can have fantasies. That it can be a Gemini feature, having lots of fantasies. In his case, it was sexual fantasies. And because he was a Gemini, he put those sexual fantasies down on paper. And it's just words. But it had a big impact. Maybe it contributed to him getting thrown in a lunatic asylum. He spent some time in the Bastille as well. And so that might be how Gemini is working in the case of the Marquis de Sade. Geminis can be deceptive, and they could be liars, and they can stab people in the back. That's one aspect of Gemini. Now, if you remember, there are a couple of Geminis with from a Russian context. So do you remember Yevgeny Prigozhin? So Yevgeny Prigozhin was head of the Wagner group. So very much responsible for taking Bakhmut. And Yevgeny Prigozhin, I think they called him Putin's chef. I mean, he was a petty criminal who made a fortune in the 90s. He became involved with catering, but then he got involved with them being a mercenary. That's a very Gemini thing. Constantly changing one's career, changing one's focus. So he starts as a petty criminal. Towards the end in Moscow, just as communism was falling, he was involved in crime. Under communism, he didn't even get in the army. There's some story about how he mugged a woman in Moscow. He was a really unpleasant piece of work, a nasty piece of work, but a lot of variety there. And so in the end, he gets involved with the Wagner group, which is this sort of, I don't know whether it's a mercenary group, a sort of contract group in Russia, and he was involved in fighting in Ukraine. So, and he talked a lot, like a Gemini. He would talk. If you were following the Ukraine war, Yevgeny Prigozhin was just talking about what he thought. He was criticizing the Russian military, and he just didn't stop. He had videos of him in Bakhmut showing pictures of dead soldiers. I think soldiers on both sides, and he was talking, and that's Gemini. But meanwhile, there is strong evidence that he was doing a deal with the Ukrainians and perhaps forces in the West to sort of backstab Russia. And in the end, he turned on Russia. He turned on, not Russia, his argument, he didn't say his argument was with Putin, but his argument was with elements of a Russian military. And he started marching on Moscow. And that is sort of Gemini thing, and the idea that he'd been perhaps been paid off. And there's one theory that the CIA or some other organization paid him off to rebel, and then having been paid off, he just kept the money, and so he's this kind of person, total Gemini, out of control. And of course, what happened was, he told Putin, by the way, that he was going to leave Russia. He did a deal with him, but he didn't leave Russia, and anyway, his plane got blown up, and no one knows who did it. It could have been the Russian government. But there is another theory that it was the CIA that killed him because he'd let them down. So so he was just as a Gemini, getting himself into a huge mess and a tangle of lies and deception. Plus, he couldn't keep his mouth shut, and that whole thing killed him. Another Gemini, continuing on the Russian theme, who I did look at, is Maxim Kuzminov. So Maxim Kuzminov was a helicopter pilot. He was a Russian helicopter pilot who, I think the Ukrainians were saying they'd offer €500,000, I think, or was it dollars, to any Ukrainian who would defect with a helicopter. So he escaped. He was in his helicopter and he flew to Ukrainian lines and landed his helicopter and got his €500,000. Now you could say, oh, what a brave, principled thing to do, but we mustn't forget that he's Gemini. So he claims that Sun in Gemini, he did some stuff on the internet, and he decided that Russia was wrong and that Ukraine was in the right. But you could say that is the dark side of Gemini, because it wasn't just that he betrayed his country. There were two other people in the helicopter who didn't know what he was doing. And when he got to Ukraine, those two people were killed. So we don't quite know how, but did they try to escape? Did the Ukrainians just execute him? We don't know. But so you might say, well, never trust a Gemini. Gemini has this idea, and Gemini think, oh, that's a good idea. I'm going to take this plane just take this plane across the border. And just two people died because of that. And that could be something quite schizoid about that. He was totally in denial about the human consequence of what he was doing. He got his €500,000, but he was killed, I think, a few months ago. Someone caught up with him. I suppose that happens, doesn't it? If you, defecting to people, it's tough being a spy, isn't it? Or being a defector. And looking at a Russian who many of us have heard of was Alexei Navalny. So Alexei Navalny was this opposition leader who he was quite flexible in his own way. At the beginning of his political career, he started criticizing immigrants, and I think he was saying, stuff against Muslims, was it? I'm not sure. But so he was coming over as quite a populist politician. But then he changed his tune. So that's a typical Gemini approach. One has to ask, why did he change his tune? Maybe he just saw, where is the advantage? What's the right thing to do? And Alexei Navalny had Sun in Gemini, Venus in Gemini. He talked a lot. I mean, he went on and on and on. Again, perhaps he took the view that his words were sacrosanct. He had this famous video about Putin's massive mansion. He went into it in detail. I think that really did for him, that video. And he just couldn't stop talking. And he couldn't, he just felt, that's Gemini. Once Gemini gets going on talking, on being critical, Gemini just keeps going. And I suppose the schizoid thing, maybe he was slightly divorced between his words and the consequences of his words. He had perhaps rationalized out the consequences of his words. And of course, firstly, he gets attacked by nerve gas. He gets to the West, then he comes back. Then even though he's in the West, he comes back He comes back to Russia, gets arrested, and then dies in a prison. Dies in prison. But I think his words really didn't help him. And one also has this question about, from a philosophical point of view, why did he change his politics? What was going on? And who was behind him? I think that he was supported by the West. And so we may be seeing Gemini at work there. Another Gemini, if you're in the UK, who you would have heard of, is Robert Maxwell. He was originally from an area that was Czechoslovakia. He was born, where he's born now is in Ukraine. He was known as the bouncing Czech. And so Robert Maxwell, incredible variety here. He was, in slight mystery. You can see his flexibility. I mean, he did loads of things. He joined the British Army. He got a military cross. He was involved in wheeling and dealing. He did deals with the Russians in the 1940s to get access to scientific journals. So he was just doing deals all the time. Set up this business. He was involved in sort of this newspaper empire. He became a member of Parliament. He became a Labour member of Parliament. He was just into absolutely everything, and that is sort of that's one aspect of Gemini. Plus, at the end, with his empire, he was stealing from his pension, from a pension fund of his employees, and so without sort of and everyone was. Everyone thought he was, a lot of people thought he was great. There are other people that were trying to get him, journalists, but anyone who tried to write a book about him or tried to reveal what he was doing would get sued. And so I suppose that's Gemini, I suppose. So he had a life of lies and deception, and I think that we can see a Gemini working like that. Okay, I haven't looked at very many women. I've just looked at Marilyn Monroe. So I'll look at another woman, and that's Marjorie Taylor Greene. So Marjorie Taylor Greene is the Republican congresswoman who, she's got Sun in Gemini. She's got a lot to say for herself. She doesn't know when to shut up, it would seem. She was sort of, I think, interrupting Biden's State of the Union speech. So she thinks it's okay. You've got these words, she's got something to say, and so she will keep saying it. And, in terms of her personal life, she's done lots of different things. I think she had a fitness, did she have some fitness studio or something, or a gym, and she was involved in that. And then she decided to get into politics. So that can be how Geminis work. They can be very flexible, and they do like to cause shock. That can be a Gemini feature. I mean, I'm not looking at his chart because I've looked at his chart so many times. It's Donald Trump. Donald Trump is, of course, a Gemini. Gemini is, with Donald Trump, by the way, we have this concept of ideological flexibility that I don't think, like Geminis very often don't believe in anything. I don't think Trump believes in anything. I don't think that Trump personally could care less about abortion or gun rights. Probably arguably he's really a New York liberal. Probably politics aside, he probably is quite accepting of women's right to choose, probably has concerns about guns, but he's got to think about what he needs to do. And so if he wants to become elected president, he's worked out that he needs to appeal to this particular constituency on the right of the spectrum. And so, you have to change your political views accordingly. If you need to be a religious, fine, he'll do it. He'll talk about Bible, books of the Bible, even if he mispronounces those books of the Bible. So that political flexibility, I think, can be very important to Geminis. And of course, Boris Johnson is a Gemini. Boris Johnson with Brexit. I mean, I think he supported Brexit, but he looked at, there was a certain opportunism there with his support for Brexit. He decided, well, I think it's in his interest, Brexit, he'll go for it. Boris Johnson, as a Gemini, he's got a lot of planets in Gemini. He's got Mars in Gemini, Mercury in Gemini, Sun in Gemini, Venus in Gemini. I mean, he does embody this idea of the Gemini who is, he's certainly very intelligent. Don't take that away from him. And got a gift with words. He does exaggerate. And he's, like many Geminis, he's not a details person. He's not good at details. They just can't really focus on the details. I know some people say that my forecasts and when I talk about astrology, I'm not a detailed person. I'm not really a details person. Geminis have problems with details, and he just doesn't fully understand his brief, and that is Boris Johnson. But talking about the ideas and also being quite sort of offensive about it. He's made remarks about Muslim women. You can look it up. What he said. He went to Myanmar, and former British colony, and he got into trouble for quoting "The Road to Mandalay," this imperialist poem by Kipling, while visiting a Buddhist temple, and the British diplomat there was completely very upset about what he was saying, I think. And there is a sense in which there is something trivial about it. This whole thing about Partygate, a lack of discipline. Geminis can have a lack of discipline. Having pizza parties in number 10, while the rest of the country is in lockdown, it's just that can be Gemini, just being a little bit too chaotic. But another thing about Geminis is that Geminis can think too much, and Geminis can rationalize that just everything is a waste of time. What is the point? And that brings us on to Jean-Paul Sartre. Jean-Paul Sartre, the French existentialist philosopher, he coming to the conclusion that life was absurd, and how do we actually deal with life once we realize it is absurd? And I think that is an aspect of Gemini that Jean-Paul Sartre embodies, realizing that it's all pointless. There really is no point. What is the point in being alive? We're just going to get old and die. We can struggle, we can do all these things, but in the end it's all a waste of time. It all comes to nothing. And we're going to be dead. What is the point? And so Jean-Paul Sartre, as a Gemini, it's not surprising that a Gemini would come up with he didn't come up with existentialism, but he really developed existentialism. It's not surprising that Sartre got so concerned about asking questions about what is the point, because Geminis just can think things out of existence. I certainly can very often do that. You can think things and you break things down. Every experience can be broken down. Art, music, it's just art. It's just little specks on a picture, and it's just all nothing. And music is just sounds. It's all nothing. It's all a waste of time. And what is the point? So that is an aspect of Gemini. And finally, I want to talk about horror films. Horror films. Okay, I'm of a particular age, and there's a particular genre of horror films that were very popular, well, obviously in the UK, but the concept of the Hammer horror film. And there are two actors who you very much associate with Hammer horror films, which is Christopher Lee and Peter Cushing. So the Dracula films, Christopher Lee was Dracula, and Peter Cushing was Van Helsing, and they were in a lot of those films. So here's Christopher Lee's chart. So Christopher Lee, born May the 27th, 1922 at 2:45 p.m. I don't really want to look at his chart in detail. I just want to point out that Christopher Lee has his sun at 5 degrees 28 Gemini. And so he played alongside Peter Cushing. Peter Cushing, well, I suppose to a younger generation, I suppose he's more famous for being in Star Wars. But of course, he made his name as a horror film actor who Hammer horror films. So remember, Christopher Lee is born on May the 27th, 1922. Peter Cushing was born on May the 26th, 1913. So different years, but one day apart. So there is Peter Cushing's sun at 4 degrees 37 Gemini. So these two mainstays of Hammer horror films both had their suns in Gemini, and indeed both had their suns at 26, 27 Gemini. In fact, so that means they both had their suns close to the fixed star, the Prima Hyadum, I think that's the brightest star in the Hyades. But there is a third actor who you associate with horror films. I don't think not so much with the Hammer, but he was certainly of the same generation. And that would be Vincent Price. And he was very much also, there are certain British horror films that he starred in. I'm thinking, particularly Theatre of Blood. I would recommend that film. That's a great film. That's where he plays an actor who kills film critics according to the different plays. One film critic is killed, using the Titus Andronicus way, where he gets force-fed his poodles or something like that. But anyway, Vincent Price. So he was in Theatre of Blood. The Abominable Dr. Phibes. But anyway, looking at Vincent Price's chart, Vincent Price was born on May the 27th, 1911. So he was born on the same day, different year, as Christopher Lee. And Peter Cushing was born on May the 26th. I mean, that is a wonderful coincidence. All these people were Geminis. Now, I don't really know much about their background and their lives, but they all had, because they were born so close together, they all had their suns on the brightest star in the Hyades, the Primum Hyades. So I'm going to go into fixed stars and the constellations, go into Robeson and see what he says. So he's talking about the Prima Hyadum, which is the chief star of the Hyades. So the Hyades were the 7 daughters of Atlas and Aethra, half-sisters of the Pleiades, with whom they were entrusted by Jupiter with the care of the infant Bacchus. They were placed among the stars as a reward for their sisterly love, which was evinced by their sorrow at the death of their brother Hyas, who was killed by a wild beast in Libya. And in terms of their influence, Simonite likens them to Mars, but this is probably a misinterpretation of Ptolemy's meaning. They give tears, sudden events, violence, fierceness, poisoning, blindness, wounds or injuries to the head by instruments, weapons or fevers, and contradictions of fortune. But anyway, Robeson talks about the sun on Hyades. So all Vincent Price, Peter Cushing, and Christopher Lee all had the sun on Hyades. So he says, with the sun, evil disposition, disturbed mind, failure in study, muddled thinking, misfortune, murder or murdered, death by blows, stabs, shooting, beheading, or shipwreck. Now, as far as I know, all of these 3 people died in their beds, by and large. I know that they had their own health issues, but that doesn't seem to affect their lives. But what I think we're seeing here is these people have their sun in Hyades with all of that disastrous symbolism, and they actually use that symbolism in terms of how they act. They just decide to act in horror films. And that's actually a clue about how we might deal with bad stuff in our chart. If we find bad stuff in our chart, we have Sun conjunct Algol or something, we find a way of living it out. We say, okay, I'm not going to run away from it. I'm going to, oh, if I've got something horrific about being stabbed, murdered, or whatever, oh, I'm going to act in horror films. And that way, all of the energy turns into the acting in a horror film, and you yourself, you avoid it. So if you've got something in your chart which is connected with death or mourning, well, what can you do? Well, you could spend your time wandering through graveyards, and then you're dealing with the symbolism. And because you're dealing with the symbolism in a way which is according to your own choice, you avoid the more destructive aspects of the symbolism. Okay, that's it. Those are a few thoughts on the Sun in Gemini. Remember, it's an incredibly biased sample. And of course, the examples I've used are quite extreme. But nonetheless, I hope you found that video of some interest. If you enjoyed this video, I would be very grateful if you were to like it. If you're not subscribed, I would of course be super grateful if you were to subscribe. And if you want to buy me a coffee, there is a link in the description. Thanks for listening, and I will talk to you again very soon.